So you got some buyers who have due diligence fees that are on the line, and if they're not able to get those transcripts or whatever information that they may need from a government entity in time, they have a very real risk of not only losing out on the home itself, but also losing all the funds, the due diligence, the money they spent on inspections, appraisals. All those monies can be lost if they're not able to get those deals closed in time, right? And it's not like you can just tell the seller, hey, let's just wait things out until the government opens back up. It should be any day now. We don't know, right? We're kind of in uncharted territory. We're already inching closer, as I said before, to the second, we're already in the territory of the second longest shutdown that we've had. So again, everything is just up in the air, right? Where people are wondering like, hey, welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. In this week's episode, I'm going to take a bit of time to discuss the government shutdown and the impact that it has on the real estate industry. I was hoping, like everyone else, that this would be a much shorter one that maybe lasted only a few hours or a few days, but we're now entering the 20th day of this shutdown, and it appears that they're still at a deadlock, right? It doesn't seem like we can see that light at the tunnel just quite yet. The longest shutdown we've ever had was about 35 days during the first Trump term, and this one looks like it may rival that one as well. Hopefully not, but again, we're not seeing a lot of promising movements being happening amongst Congress, and I want to take some time to talk about the impacts that is having in the real estate industry. So for one, real estate often, and I've said this before, it usually reacts a little bit later than most of the other economic factors that we have in place, right? So the stock market obviously reacts sharply at a moment's notice whenever anything crazy happens in the market. Real estate tends to move a little bit slower, so we might not see kind of the long lasting effects until maybe another month or two, whatever, to see how this thing all plays out, if it's something that ends sooner than expected or whatever. But the longer it goes, the more we're going to start to feel it in the real estate industry. So I'm going to take some time to talk about some of the immediate effects that we started to feel and see, as well as things that could happen down the road the longer this shutdown continues to go on. One of the first things that it has an obvious impact on is just the mortgage loan process. So we've done entire episodes of this podcast where we've talked extensively about how the loan process is one of the main reasons that real estate deals take so long in the first place, right? That's what's often stopping things up, or why it takes 3, 4, 5 weeks sometimes to get a deal to close, is because usually the buyer's going through that whole entire loan process or mortgage where they were getting all their documents verified, their taxes, their W-2s, pay stubs, 1099s, all those different things are being reviewed, combed through with a fine-tooth comb to see if there's anything that could be wrong. They have to get things verified by employers. There's a lot of different things that are going on during that process, and that's often why it takes a little bit longer. So as you can imagine, when there's a government shutdown, specifically the loans that are government-backed loans are the ones that you would expect to see kind of the biggest impact right out of the gate. So the FHA, VA, USDA loans, those are going to be the ones that are going to have kind of the immediate impact based on what's happening in the government shutdown. Now, fortunately, a lot of the VA and FHA loans, we haven't really been seeing much of a difference. There are some departments or some parts of those departments that are allowed to continue working even during a shutdown where they're considered essential. But if there are any complications, that's where you can start to see things really slow up. USDA, I've heard some reports from other realtors where those loans have been noticeably slower as opposed to the FHA and VA ones. Those ones are moving a lot slower pace at those ones. And so it's a lot of differences that we're seeing in just the timeline of the way it goes, right? You also have to keep in mind too, when Doge came through and eliminated a lot of the workforce in different areas. That's also playing a factor as well, right? So you were already having some departments and some areas of the government that were working on somewhat of a skeletal staff for efficiency purposes. And if you close those down, then you're really working through difficult times trying to get these loans closed and everything like that. And so I would imagine that that's probably part of the reason why USDA might be feeling a little bit more of a lag time and a delay than some of those other ones. But that's one of the big things too as well. Another factor, and I've heard again stories with some other realtors as well in our community who are talking about the way that the IRS transcripts have caused issues in loan delays, right? So they're needing to get every now and then when someone's getting a loan, sometimes they might have more complicated tax issues or things where it's not just a simple, hey, show us your return and that's going to be good enough. Sometimes they have to get additional information. They have to get additional transcripts and everything like that in to be able to close those deals. And if those departments are closed, whatever, like we have heard some stories or started hearing stories of people who can't get those tax transcripts in on time to be able to close the deals or transactions that they have under contract, right? So you figure they're already under contract, going through the loan process, and at no fault of their own, they're being held up and being able to provide the information that's needed for them to get that loan closed. And depending on, like I said, what market you're in, that can really weigh heavily on a buyer. In North Carolina, as we talked about before, we have what's called a due diligence fee, right? That's a fee that the buyer pays to the seller upfront to be able to get that home under contract. Now, if the deal closes successfully as planned, those funds are credited back to the buyer. But if the buyer, for whatever reason, whether it was their fault or not, if they can't close that deal, they very well run the risk of forfeiting those due diligence fees to the seller, right? So if it gets past a certain date, maybe we have a grace period of about 7 days past the expected closing date. If it goes past that point and the seller says, I can't afford to wait any longer, or I don't want to wait any longer for this deal to be able to close, they have every right to terminate that transaction, and that buyer loses all of that due diligence, right? And so you got some buyers who have due diligence fees that are on the line, and if they're not able to get those transcripts or whatever information that they may need from a government entity in time, they have a very real risk of not only losing out on the home itself, but also losing all the funds, the due diligence, the money they spent on inspections, appraisals. All those monies can be lost if they're not able to get those deals closed in time, right? And it's not like you can just tell the seller, hey, let's just wait things out until the government opens back up. It should be any day now. We don't know, right? We're kind of in uncharted territory. We're already inching closer, as I said before, to the second, we're already in the territory of the second longest shutdown that we've had. So again, everything is just up in the air, right? Where people are wondering like, hey, as sellers, they're like, hey, we're going further into the holiday season, which is typically a slower time. We can't necessarily afford to keep giving this buyer extensions to get this deal closed. We have to see if we may need to terminate this deal and work with somebody or try to sell it again to someone who can get it closed on time, right? So there's a lot of people who are really worried about what's happening right now because those mortgage times are taking longer as a result of this. Now, fortunately, the majority of the loans are still being able to be processed and everything like that. But again, the longer this takes, the more issues and problems we're going to start seeing, right? So you figure if we, God forbid, I hate to even mention this possibility, but let's say we get to the point where we're in January, February, March, and the government is still shut down or still having slow times from opening back up all of a sudden. That's going to have a very real impact on tax returns, right? And so, like I said, it's one thing now where people have their returns already in place and they're just usually asking for additional information. But if you're already dealing with a backlog of returns in the place, that can have a very real impact on the real estate industry moving into the spring market of next year, right? And so hopefully we're able to get this thing resolved quickly so that we're not creating more of a backlog where there's a lot of people who aren't able to get those returns submitted in time, and then they're having to deal with not having all of the paperwork and the necessary documentation that they're going to need to be able to qualify for these loans, right? So those are just one of the things, right? So that's one option. Another thing that has an impact on what we do in the real estate world is that there's a lot of departments like HUD and the Census Bureau and many other departments that take a lot of the stats and data on the general market, right? So they take the jobs report and they take like all of the inflation and everything else like that into account. And that has a very real impact on certain loan products, certain things that we're doing in our marketplace. So like you figure Section 8 housing, or if there's people who are waiting for certain loan types based on what's happening in the market, that can have a very real impact on them as well, right? Where that data is not being able to be collected, processed, researched, and analyzed. There's a lot of different things that are hinging on that information to be able to determine, right? And if the government continues to be shut down, we don't have accurate numbers to see what's really going on in the marketplace. Like we saw earlier this year, just how messed up things were when these jobs reports were being corrected off of like wild numbers, right? They were just wildly off in their estimations of the jobs report. And that had a very real impact on the Fed reducing rates, right? What the mortgage interest was looking like, all of that was impacted because we were working with numbers and data that was already off. And so when you take the fact that we were already struggling to get an accurate feel for what the jobs report and inflation and everything was doing, it's going to become even more difficult the longer the government is shut down and we don't have these departments collecting that data the way that we need, right? So that's another thing. But the most important thing, or the most important aspect of this government shutdown and the way that it relates to the real estate market, all revolves around one word, and that is uncertainty. Uncertainty is a powerful factor that cannot be underestimated in the process of going through the real estate deal, right? Because anytime there's uncertainty, that causes ripple effects in the way that the economy is impacted in real estate. Buyers and sellers, they want a sure thing, or as close as a sure thing as possible when it comes to getting your real estate, right? When you're selling, you want to be assured that you can sell for top dollar as quickly as possible with the least amount of hassle. When you're a buyer, you want to be assured that you are buying a home that is not going to be a money pit, that you're not going to have issues with financing, that you're not going to have problems getting that to the closing table, right? You want as close to a sure bet as possible. There's no way to ever guarantee a 100% sure bet in the real estate world. That's even in the best case scenarios. But when you throw in a government shutdown, right, there's so much uncertainty surrounding that it has a very real impact on the way that the housing market goes. Even for people who aren't necessarily working for the government or don't have any part of their paycheck or decision making related to the government, it can have a very real impact on how confident they feel getting into the market, right? So there may be some buyers who have no parts of their income tied to the government shutdown. However, if they get a sense or a feeling that there's a lot of uncertainty going around where it's like hey, you could buy something or overpay for it, or you might get a property that's not the best fit, whatever, they may say, you know what, we're just going to hold off, wait until things stabilize a little bit, get a little bit of a safer environment, a safer market, and then we'll feel comfortable moving forward, right? So you have a lot of buyers who are like that. You also have the buyers and the sellers who are directly tied to, or do have their income directly tied to the government shutdown, right? So the buyers, again, if they're out there searching, they basically have to put their search on hold until this corrects itself, because you definitely don't want to willingly go into contract not knowing whether or not you'll be able to verify all the information, and you could just be throwing money out the window. But then also you have the sellers who are worried as well about, okay, if we have our income tied to the government shutdown, right, how does this impact where we're moving to, the house that we want to buy? But then also, how does it impact the pool of buyers that are available to us, right? Because if you do have buyers who know they're going to be using government-backed loans, or they are going to need tax transcripts and things that are going to be more difficult for them to obtain during this time, that may, again, impact your buyer pool in what is already typically a slower time of year. Remember, I said usually once we get to like this October time frame, that's when sales really start to dip. The closer we get to the holidays, the more you start to see real estate sales dip a little bit more. There's less buyers and sellers in the market. Nobody really wants to be moving during the holiday season. unless they have to or unless they're really motivated to make that happen. And so again, you're taking an already small pool of people and shrinking that even more when you throw in this government shutdown. And there's so much uncertainty around it. There's also uncertainty for investors. And that plays a very real impact into the mortgage rates as well, right? If there's less investors who feel confident about it, that can cause rates to fluctuate wildly in many cases too. And so, again, there's a lot of things we're still waiting to see how it all pans out. But one thing we can definitively say is that the longer this shutdown goes on, the more of a very real impact, negative impact it is going to have on the real estate market. And there's going to be a lot of people who are really scared to move forward and kind of stand pat. And then you also have to consider the fact, too, that President Trump also came out and said there may be some people who don't get their jobs back, right? So we're all moving forward with the assumption that like the government workers, they're furloughed right now and they will be able to get that back pay when they come back or when the government opens back up. But when he says, hey, there's a potential that some departments or some people may be eliminated or they may have their jobs removed, well, that adds even another layer of uncertainty and fear in the marketplace too, where now there's a lot of people wondering like, okay, do I need to start looking for another job right now? Like, is my job even going to exist? I'm moving forward and I'm still coming to work with the hope that when the government opens back up, I'll get all that back pay. But apparently that may not be guaranteed. We don't know. But again, the more things that are uncertainty, the more unknowns that are in the market, the higher the likelihood that it's going to cause some negative impacts in the real estate market. And so this is definitely something that we want to pay attention to, look forward to. The National Association of Realtors already came out, wrote a letter that they published urging Congress to open the government back up because, again, we can very easily see the impacts that this is having on the economy, the real estate world. All of that is impacted by this. And so hopefully we can find some resolution on both sides to get things open back up. And then also you have to take into account as well, and this is one thing that we don't even have time to go into, but you consider like the whole reason this shutdown is in place is because there's a lot of back and forth surrounding health insurance and that on. So if you figure if the solution to this government opening back up causes a spike in health insurance rates, well, again, that's going to affect affordability with housing as well. And so there's so many different factors and ripple effects from the government staying closed as well as the government opening back up and what those terms may be. And so definitely something that we want to pay attention to and look forward to see what is going to happen and how those things are impacting. And I'll always look for ways to keep you all updated on how it is impacting what I'm seeing currently in the market as well. And we'll kind of go from there. But I hope that this is helpful for you to kind of give you some things to think on and understand and where the market is. If you ever have questions, I'm always happy to talk through it. But I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day. Let's hope we get this government back up and running quickly. And I'll talk to you all next week. Have a good one.